Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and we got some good news on the last Frankenstein front. Got an email from our distributor the other day and said that he's going to have a check disc to us shortly, which is where we watch basically a test Blu-ray and make sure there's no last errors that we need to correct or adjust. I just have to send over a couple files to him. We had to do a little bit of tweaking on the subtitles and needs a music track for the menu, but we are seeing the end in sight. So very exciting to have that finally come about. Our film has also been added to an additional streaming platform within like the last week or so, Discovered. Discovered, also known as Discovered TV. It is free there, so check that out. It's yet another way you can get down with our fright flick. So we'll have a link to that up soon on the Gila Film website, and if you go to the Facebook page, we have a link there to that. In broader Gila Films news, our producer extraordinaire, Jay Leonard, has launched a new podcast of his own with Sean Barnes, who is the producer on his films that Jay directs, and it's called Super Salad Podcast. So check it out. It's on Spotify and I think iTunes as well. And give it a listen. Give it some good ratings. Give some 5 stars, some thumbs up. And I know there's an Instagram account for that now. I don't know if there's any other social media yet, but check it out and support our Mohawk Valley movie making mentor. In the arena of new title announcements, some exciting developments for all us James Cagney fans over at Kino Lorber. They are going to be releasing on Blu-ray for the first time ever Cagney's 1945 film Blood on the Sun, which this is a movie that's kind of languished in budget label hell. It fell into the public domain back in the 70s, so most of the DVDs out there have been really crummy quality. There was a DVD a while ago that did actually source the negative, but overall this is a film that just really hasn't had a great stellar presentation. And this is the second film Cagney did after winning the Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy. After winning that award, he and his brother William Cagney formed their own production company. And so William would produce, James would star in the movies, and the first film they made was a movie called Johnny Come Lately. And then they followed that up with this one, Blood on the Sun, which is it's kind of like a World War II movie, but it's a pre-World War II movie. In the film, Cagney plays an American news editor in Japan in like 1929-ish, who gets into hot water with the Japanese secret police and powers that be because his newspaper publishes about the existence of a document that outlines a plan for the Japanese to conquer the world. And the interesting thing about this film is that it gives you a chance to see Cagney employing martial arts. Some people actually call it the first martial arts movie ever. I don't know exactly if that's true or not, but Cagney did study judo and performed his own stunts in the film. So that alone is definitely worth checking out. But it's a solid film. I saw it many years ago. It's definitely very entertaining. Directed by Frank Lloyd, who was a 2-time Best Director Oscar winner back in the 30s. He did Cavalcade and Mutiny on the Bounty. And, good cast. Sophia Sidney is the female lead. And Rosemary DeCamp, who played Cagney's mother in Yankee Doodle Dandy, here plays a supporting role. So it's interesting to see them kind of reteaming. But yeah, Blood on the Sun is going to be a Blu-ray from Kino Lorber's deal with Paramount that they have going on right now. And it's going to be a 4K scan of the 35mm nitrate film grain. And the movie also actually took home an Oscar for Best Art Direction. Most of Cagney's, if not all of Cagney's films, I think, up to Yankee Doodle Dandy are Warner Brothers. So, that they'll pretty much, everything is pretty much on DVD that can be, and most of it will probably find its way to Blu-ray at some point, I would think. But some of the stuff he did after he left Warner Brothers for a while, after he won the Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy, he did do some films for Warner Brothers later on down the road, but he kind of moved to all these different outfits. Like he did some stuff at Fox and Universal. So it's interesting to kind of see those slowly kind of get checked off the list of movies that he made. that haven't really had a proper or any release on physical media. The kind of the big one for me is he directed a movie, Cagney, called Shortcut to Hell in the late 50s. And it's based on the same Graham Greene story that was adapted for the classic film noir, This Gun for Hire. And Cagney might be in it in like an introductory capacity to kind of introduce the film. I don't know though that he actually even does that. But that movie's never been released in any format. And that's at Paramount too. So I know that with this new Paramount deal, Kino Lorber has mentioned they have a bunch of film noir titles in the pipeline, and really fingers crossed, hoping that that might finally make it out. I've never seen the film, of course, and I never even recall it airing on TV, but I would love to kind of see what he brings as a director. That would definitely be interesting to check out. I'm a huge fan of Cagney. Angels with Dirty Faces and White Heat, just incredible films right there. But the guy had great range because then he would do these big musicals like Footlight Parade and, of course, Yankee Doodle Dandy. So just incredible talent. And actually, speaking of Cagney, I forgot to mention, and could have mentioned this last episode, Criterion Collection announced their February releases. And among them is The Roaring Twenties, which is one of Cagney's truly great gangster films. Not quite, it's like a notch below Angels with Dirty Faces, but again, finds him opposite Humphrey Bogart as antagonists of each other. And was directed by Raoul Walsh, who collaborated several times with Cagney. He directed him also in White Heat and The Strawberry Blonde. Really good film that Warner Brothers had released that on DVD, and people were kind of wondering why it was taking so long to go to Blu-ray. And the powers that be at Warner Archive Collection, which is kind of like the main outlet that Warner's has for their kind of older classic titles, said that, don't worry, it's coming, it's in the works. And so Criterion is busting out with it, and actually they're doing it in 4K, a 4K of it. So that will be awesome to finally pick that up. Lost a couple heavy hitters this past week in the film industry, or at least the news of their passing finally circulated. And the first one that I heard about was director Elliot Silverstein, who passed away aged 96. And he was pretty prolific in television throughout the 50s and into the 60s. Directed episodes of the Twilight Zone, Route 66, Half Gun Will Travel, and then got his feature film directing debut with Cat Ballou, the Western comedy starring Jane Fonda and Lee Marvin, which was very successful. Marvin ended up winning the Best Actor Oscar for his work on that, and followed it with a handful of films throughout the next 15 years. His next gig after that was a film called The Happening, which didn't really make a big splash in its initial release. It starred Anthony Quinn as a businessman who gets kidnapped by these youngins. And kind of its biggest place in film history now is that it was the film debut of Faye Dunaway. But right after that, he went back to the Western genre and had another big hit with A Man Called Horse, starring Richard Harris, which got good reviews, came out in 1970, and by 1976 had made $44 million worldwide on just a $5 million budget, which, especially back then, when you figure out inflation and all that fun stuff, speaks very highly of its success, and spawned 2 sequels. Next up after that, he did a film called Nightmare Honeymoon in 1974, and it's kind of I've seen the film. It's enjoyable enough. It's, about newlyweds on their honeymoon, and they witness a pair of hitmen committing a murder. But it's such a strange kind of blip in Silverstein's filmography, because so you have, it starts off with obviously big with Cat Ballou, and then The Happening doesn't, again, it doesn't really have much of an effect, but it's still, big cast. Anthony Quinn and George Maharis was in it. Right back with success with A Man Called Horse. And then after Nightmare Honeymoon, the next film that he would direct would be The Car, the 1977 Universal horror film, which starred James Brolin, who was well known at that time. Of course, he had already done Marcus Welby and been in films like Westworld. And I don't know how The Car did in its initial release financially. I know that the reviews weren't very kind, but maybe even if it didn't do well in its theatrical release, it obviously has had enough of a following over the years that they did a direct-to-video sequel a few years back and brought back Ronnie Cox for that. But Nightmare Honeymoon in the middle is just kind of like this odd thing. It doesn't have really the biggest name in it is Pat Hingle, Commissioner Gordon from the Michael Keaton Batman, and the film has it's definitely stronger content than you would see in a TV movie at that time, but it has this kind of like almost television quality to it. Not even, and I'm not even saying the way that he directed it, but it just feels like an anomaly. And then you start digging into the history of the film, which came out in '74, like I said, and it actually started out as a movie that was supposed to have been directed by Nicholas Roeg, the legendary British cinematographer turned director who did films like The Man Who Fell to Earth and Don't Look Now. And there's rumors that W.D. Richter originally worked on the script, and he is Academy Award nominated writer for Brubaker. He directed Buckaroo Banzai. And at one point, they were recording Ryan O'Neal, J. Michael Vincent to be in the film, and that eventually morphed somehow into Silverstein coming on board, and the film's being obviously retooled in some fashion because Rogan in an interview said he had kind of envisioned this with these comedic elements, whereas you watch the actual film and it's a straight up thriller. And then apparently Silverstein wanted to work with unknowns in it, and the lead roles eventually went to Dak Rambo, who at that time had starred on the TV show The Guns of Will Sonnet, and then an actress named Rebecca Diana Smith, who basically did one other movie role after that in a guest spot on a TV show and then stopped acting. And the film, they filmed it in '72. It got a theatrical release of some sort in '74. Didn't play L.A. until after that. And I don't know, it's just kind of this really interesting. It's that kind of film that, like, the history of it and the fact that someone like Silverstein was involved with it. You kind of wonder more about the genesis of it and why it's there. Definitely a film I need to revisit though after reading about his passing. But like I said, he did that. He did The Car afterwards, and then basically just went back to TV directing for the most of the rest of his career. He did some TV movies. He did like episode of Picket Fences and episodes of Tales from the Crypt. In '94, he did come back to direct a kind of a B action movie called Flashfire with Billy Zane and Louis Gossett Jr. But kind of aside from like Capaloo and The Man Called Horse, one of the big contributions he's really known for in his life was that he was instrumental. He was really instrumental in protecting the rights of a director. At the DGA, Directors Guild of America, the union, he was key in creating what's called the Bill of Creative Rights. And one of the things that laid out is the right of a member of the DGA to having a director's cut. And it's pretty much universally recognized, his unbelievable importance to directors everywhere for being the real cheerleader behind that and the guy who helped, orchestrate that and making that a reality. Now, going across the Atlantic, we lost another highly regarded filmmaker, director, and that would be Aldo Lado, the Italian director. And he worked in many genres, but he's probably best remembered for his work in giallo films, specifically Short Night of Glass Dolls, Who Saw Her Die, and Night Train Murders, which is a Christmas has a Christmas setting to it, in case you're itching to watch that, which is kind of like The Last House on the Left on a train. Well, basically, it is Last House on the Left on a train. But he also directed the Star Wars ripoff, The Humanoid, with Richard Kiel. But, again, this was involved in many other genres and is really highly regarded for his work in horror. And Who Saw Her Die, that was, again, that's one, both that and Night Train Murders. I haven't seen those probably since around the time I saw Nightmare Honeymoon. It's probably been, 15 years or so. But I do know that Who Saw Her Die definitely had some really nice stylish touches. Stars George Lazenby, one of his post James Bond roles. So definitely has some stuff in his filmography worth checking out. Now, in the last episode, we mentioned the passing of John Bailey, the famed cinematographer of movies like The Big Chill, and we just kind of commenting on how, there's always a political aspect to any kind of awards ceremony. Sometimes people, never get nominated or win an award despite being highly skilled and respected within their field, and you kind of wonder, why does that happen? How does that happen? We talked about Bailey and all the incredible movies he had shot, and the fact that he was never nominated once for a Best Cinematography Oscar. And just the other day, we had the passing of Victor J. Kemper, age 96, and it's kind of the exact same thing. I mean, this guy was just an incredible body of work he left behind, and never once nominated for the Best Cinematography Academy Award. And again, awards have debatable importance and debatable influence, and we've all heard stories of people like, Richard Burton or Peter O'Toole being nominated like, half a dozen times and never winning over the course of their careers. Interestingly, Myrna Loy, Everett G. Robinson, John Barrymore, those three were never nominated, even once, for an Oscar in their lifetime. So, there's obviously not always a direct correlation between, awards and greatness. You see that in all areas, though. There's people who aren't in the Baseball Hall of Fame who, more because of their character than any issue with their stats or even with doping. But I'm just, bear with me here. Listen, this is in chronological order. I just want to run through a list of some of the heavy hitters from Kemper's career. These are films shot by Victor Kemper. So going back to he started in 1970, and here are some of the films he shot. Okay, he did Husbands, the John Cassavetes movie, The Hospital, the Oscar-winning George C. Scott flick, The Candidate with Robert Redford, Seamus with Burt Reynolds, The Friends of Eddie Coyle, The Gambler with James Caan, Dog Day Afternoon, Bob Rafelson's Stay Hungry, Ilya Kazan's The Last Tycoon, Elaine May's Mikey and Nicky, Slapshot, Audrey Rose, Oh God, Coma, Eyes of Laura Mars, Injustice for All, The Jerk, The Final Countdown, National Lampoon's Vacation, Cloak and Dagger, one of my all-time faves, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Clue, and we would not be forgiven if we didn't also mention Tommy Boy. But just in terms of, just some really, classic films in there. I'm just thinking Dog Day Afternoon, obviously, and a lot of big box office hits there. That's a really pretty staggering legacy he leaves behind. And never nominated. What the heck's up with that? But rest in peace to him. And then last was actress Frances Sternhagen, passed away. And she was 93, and one of those who's just really memorable in kind of the three big arenas of acting, stage, film, and television. And so on the stage, she is actually a 2-time Tony Award winner. She won a Tony for the Neil Simon's The Good Doctor, and then for a revival of The Heiress. But she also had another 5 nominations beyond that, and one of the roles that she created on Broadway was on Golden Pond, the role of Ethel Thayer, which was played by Katharine Hepburn in the film version. On television, Sternhagen, she earned 3 Emmy nominations combined for playing Cliff the mailman's mom on Cheers, and then Charlotte's mother-in-law, Kristen Davis's mother-in-law in Sex and the City. And she also was on ER and The Closer in recurring roles. And then, of course, countless big screen films that she popped in, generally more like, character parts, but, movies like Misery, The Hospital, Outland, Up to Down Staircase, Communion, Raising Cain, and just one of those unforgettable, great character actress looks to her and voices, truly gifted performer. So sad to see her leave us. All right, we are now officially in Christmas movie viewing season, Christmas television season. It basically starts on the Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. And my girlfriend and I, we'd already watched several TV episodes and such in the days following Thanksgiving. But the other day, we finally sat down and had a chance to watch our first Christmas movie of the season. And it's a film that many people may not be familiar with or even realize it's a Christmas movie, but it's a really incredibly enjoyable flick from 1945, Universal Pictures' Lady on a Train. And this movie starred Deanna Durbin, who, if you're not familiar with her, she was like one of, I think actually there was a time where she was the biggest star at Universal Pictures and basically saved that studio from bankruptcy. She was hugely popular throughout the 30s and early 40s in films like Three Smart Girls, 100 Men and a Girl. It Started with Eve, which I highly recommend. And they were musical comedies that she was in. At that time, even though sometimes you could be a younger performer and get nominated for an Academy Award, they also would every so often give out an Academy Award for like outstanding juvenile performance. It was more for like your body of work or the body of work of a year. Like Shirley Temple got one. Margaret O'Brien got one. I think Haley Mills was the last person to get that. And it wasn't something they necessarily did every year. but Durbin did get one of those as well. So in the mid 40s, she was working with this producer named Felix Jackson, who would actually briefly later become her husband. And they were working to kind of change up her image, give her a chance to kind of shine in different material. And one of these attempts was a film called Christmas Holiday, which is, like the title implies, set at Christmas time, and a movie we might kind of have a full episode about at some point. Definitely an interesting film. It's probably the darkest material she did. It was directed by Robert Siodmak, the famous film noir director who did The Killers. Following that movie, which was definitely also a very very big, heavy, dramatic role for her. Following that, they decided to also kind of continue in this vein of just shifting her image somewhat with Lady on a Train, which is absolutely 100% a comedy. It's a mixture of comedy and murder mystery and Christmas film and also film noir. But it's different than the types of comedy she had done previously. The singing this time takes much more of a background. There's only 3 songs in the entire movie, and they're really there's a scene where she has to pose as a nightclub singer. She has to take someone's identity, so that gives her a chance to sing a couple tunes then. And there's another part where she sings Silent Night. But it's really definitely would not fall into like that kind of much more musically driven classification that some of her earlier films had. And the film is based on a story written by Leslie, I'm sure I'm butchering his last name, Charteris, who was the creator of the famous character, the Saint, Simon Templar, who had been the subject of many movies in the famous Roger Moore TV series in the 60s, and then later the not-so-famous Val Kilmer film. And in it, Durbin plays a girl named Nikki Collins, who's comes from a successful family. She's coming to visit a relative in New York City from the West Coast, and as her train is approaching the station, this is for the Christmas holidays, she witnesses, while reading a murder mystery novel, she witnesses a man killed. An old man being murdered through a window of a building they're driving by. And she can't see who the killer is, but she sees the murder take place. And so the rest of the film is her in a very screwball comedy kind of fashion, trying to convince the police that a murder's happened, and then, of course, trying to solve it herself, trying to get this author of the murder mystery book she was reading to help her out. And meanwhile, of course, she starts drawing the attention of the real killer. It's really just a terrific blend of these different genres. As a film noir, because it's definitely not something I would have thought of as a film noir at first. I would have been like, okay, it's a murder mystery comedy. But Kino Lorber, they're the ones who put this out on Blu-ray. It had previously been available in the Universal DVD set. And when they released it, they put it in one of their film noir sets. And as I was watching it the other day with my girlfriend, which is probably like the 3rd or 4th time I've seen it, I did start to really impress upon me how it's basically film noir in style, in visual style. I mean, it's just incredibly the lighting and the almost like expressionistic use of shadows is very heavily film noir-esque, and it's not totally surprising because the movie was shot by a guy named Elwood Burdell or Woody Burdell, and he shot The Killers, which is one of the most famous film noirs of the 40s, which was directed by Robert Siodmak, who, as we mentioned, directed Deanna Durbin and Christmas Holiday. And Burdell also shot Phantom Lady, which was another really famous 40s noir that Siodmak had directed. He had shot Christmas Holiday with Deanna, and he would also shoot The Unsuspected, which is a really interesting film noir over at Warner Brothers that came out in 47. A lot of the rest of his body of work is kind of like standard Universal fare. He did some of their horror stuff at the time. And I don't know, I'm kind of curious, like, to what degree he brought a film noir look to this movie on his own from having done that with Siodmak on those earlier films. The Killers was after Lady on a Train, but Christmas Holiday and Phantom Lady preceded it. And that's not me trying to take away from the director of the film. His name was Charles David, but this was the first film of only 2 films he ever directed. He had been in France, working in various capacities in the industry there, and then over in England, working as assistant director and production manager, and eventually made his way to the U.S. All, of course, this being this traveling, this emigration being the result of Hitler rising to power in World War II. And so I don't want to say that he didn't, have any voice in the look of the film, but it's just the fact that, Burdell had come off these film noirs, working with one of the most famous directors of that genre. It really does kind of make me wonder what he brought to this in terms of that look. And the film also is interesting the way it's shot, how it adapts its style to what's happening at the moment. Like, it doesn't try to necessarily bring that film noir high contrast use of stark shadows to every scene in the film. I mean, when it's working with more some of the more comedic moments, it's kind of relying on more traditional setups and camera angles. And then when it switches gears into some of the more darker parts of the film, the more suspense heavy parts of the movie, then it really just dials up that film noir look. It's funny because there's a scene in the film where it's more of a comedic part where there's some banter going on between Deanna Durbin and a character played by Edward Everett Horton, who is a veteran comedic character actor, was in tons of movies, a bunch of movies with Frank Capra, and was later on in F Troop. And he plays basically an employee of her father's. Her father's a very wealthy businessman who is been sent to kind of chauffeur her and chaperone her while she's in the city. And they're having this comedic bit back and forth, and then her father calls, and she has to get on the phone with him, and he asks her, you never see the father, it's always off camera, but he asks her to sing Silent Night for her, and of course it's a Christmas movie, so we got to do that. And just like from one cut to the next, it goes from this, like I said, this very strong traditional, 40s comedic filming to this close-up glamour shot of her as she's laying down on a bed singing Silent Night, and it's looks like it's shot through hazed gauze and everything. It just like every time we watch it, my girlfriend and I get a crack out of that because there's like not even any attempt to have some kind of transition between those two moments. It's like, all right, here we are. We're going for the magazine cover look now for Deanna when she's singing the song. Another cool thing about the film is just its use of locations. I mean, the film is basically entirely shot on sets, sound stages, but just it's constantly moving. It starts out on the train, and she's never really staying in one place. Once she gets to New York City, she's off to the police department to kind of tell them about the murder. She's in the apartment that's been rented to her for New York City. She's over at the mystery writer's apartment, which has this cool like. It's this higher class because he's a successful novelist, higher class apartment with like 2 levels. There's a bunch of scenes that take place at this basically this secluded mansion where this man she saw murdered, where he had resided, and it's very wintry out in the snow-covered grounds of the estate. And then there's some really great stuff that takes place at this later on at the end of the film that takes place at this industrial building that the family of this murdered man owns, and where Deanna is kind of being chased through this very again very film noir lit complex where there's this one room where it's just full of like, I don't know what it's supposed to be, like road salt or sand, but it looks kind of like these dunes that she's kind of trying to run across and hide on inside a building. So it's just some really unique ideas that they had for where some of the action should took place, and they kept it moving constantly. And this I do give kudos to director Charles David for. There's a lot of in the middle of the film, a big section of the movie that takes place in this nightclub called the Circus, which has like this circus theme. There's like dancers who look like they're like jungle cats, and a guy dressed like a ringmaster. And Durbin, like I said, she goes there because one of the key people involved in this murder plot is this nightclub singer that she then, through some events, has to kind of take her place, impersonate her. And there's a lot of different within this nightclub. There's a lot of different like mini locations. There's a dressing room for this nightclub singer that has an entire wall window, which allows you inside to look out to the nightclub floor, but people on the outside, they think it's just a mirror. And then there's offices where like some of the evil henchmen of the unknown killer work, and there's like this cellar space and basement space. And the film, while it goes through this kind of like this midsection of the movie, is constantly moving back and forth through these locations. Sometimes it's just to cut from one action to another. Sometimes there's actually like chases and fights that take place within this midsection of the film, and the geography of it never gets confusing. It's a kind of a setup where you could very easily be confused as to where are you and what part of this building are we in? Are we still in the building? Have we cut to a scene outside of the building? The use of space and the use and how they show the characters moving from one part of this rather large building to another, and while interplaying that with kind of little things thrown in the mix like that one-way mirror / window, which kind of plays with your sense of space as you're watching the film. The way that they take the movements of characters from one place in the building to another and intermix that with action scenes. So like, we have to go from place A in this building to place B, or we're going to do that not just following the character as they walk from one place to another or cutting from one place to another. We're going to actually have them be chased from one place to another. We need to go from this part of the building to another part. Well, let's put a chase in there at the same time, or let's put an action beat in there where someone has to like smash through a window or something like that. And it keeps this midsection of the film, which could easily become very stage bound. Like it could become very much like a play at this point, where you're kind of stuck in one building, and it just doesn't really feel cinematic. And they keep it cinematic by constantly through this just kinetic filmmaking. And I would have to give praise to David. I'm sure he must have had some say on that. It definitely does not. When you think about this as, him being a first-time director, obviously he'd been in the industry for a while, but still, even if you've been an AD for a while, assistant director, production manager, just going from that to actually directing a feature film, that's still a big jump. And for him to pull off something very complex like that, it kind of reminds me of going back to, like, we talked over the 4th of July about the movie 1776, the musical, about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And one of the really impressive things about that, which was directed by a guy named Peter Hunt, is just how he kept, he was basically adapting a play for the film medium, and it had all these characters that you had to remember, all these historical characters. It had some well-known character actors in the cast, but there weren't any big stars, and a lot of it took place within this one location, Independence Hall, and yet the film feels like a movie. It never feels like a film play. And I think Lady on a Train, that it's really impressive to me each time I see it, how this lengthy section in the middle is just really handled so well and so with such energy. Another big great thing about this film is the cast. It is littered with character actors. It's insane. I mean, we mentioned Edward Everett Horton's in it. William Frawley, Fred Mertz, plays the police desk sergeant who Deanna tries to first report the murder to. As she kind of gets embroiled in this whole murder plot and starts finding out more about the family of the deceased man, she meets his nephews, played by Dan Duryea, the great, which is great casting because this film has a wonderful screwball comedy touch to it, yet it's still rooted in these mystery genre, and like we talked about, the film noir style. And Dan Duryea, of course, was a staple of film noir, so well known for it in films like Too Late for Tears and Black Angel and The Woman in the Window and Scarlet Street. So to have him be in this twist on the genre is a really nice touch. And Ralph Bellamy is the other nephew. Ralph Bellamy at this time, of course, had already received an Oscar nomination, Best Supporting Actor for The Awful Truth. He had been in His Girl Friday. But interestingly, this would be the last film he would make for a good 10-year stretch, and he would be working on the stage and in television. He had a show on for a while called Man Against Crime, but he would return to filmmaking in the 50s, and of course, as everyone knows, have a whole new generation of fans in the 80s and 90s with movies like Trading Places and Pretty Woman. But yeah, it's great to. I'm a big Duryea fan, especially of those two. No disrespect to Ralph Bellamy, he's a solid actor, but really cool to see Duryea in this kind of role. And then not so familiar names, but playing their aunt, which I guess would be the murdered victim's sister-in-law, is Elizabeth Patterson, another great character actress who most people remember from the TV show I Love Lucy. She played Mrs. Trumbull, one of the tenants in the in the Ricardos and Mertz's building, who would babysit little Ricky. Samuel S. Hines plays the family attorney. That's, again, not a name you might recognize, but you know him because he plays Jimmy Stewart's dad in It's a Wonderful Life. Alan Jenkins, and just one of the most familiar faces of 30s and 40s films, playing gangsters in hoods in movies like Dead End and Brother Orchid. He plays one of the villains in the film. So it's just incredibly littered with these these wonderful, incredibly talented character performers who just so effortlessly deliver this great, really entertaining material. Got to take a moment to talk about David Bruce. He is the actor who plays the mystery writer. So one of the cool things about this film is that it does, and yet it doesn't really have a leading man, because you have this mystery author named Wayne Morgan, played by David Bruce, who has a very uppity girlfriend, fiance, who we meet in the film, played by Patricia Morrison. You have these two nephews that we mentioned, Dan Duryea and Ralph Bellamy, and all three of them at some point, you kind of start thinking in terms of, one of these guys is going to be end up being the quote unquote leading man, because it's a 1940s film, so of course she's going to have to ride off into the sunset with someone, but not one of them really kind of dominates in that role, or really comes across strong in that kind of position until you're in the film quite a bit, which is nice to see, because it's just something, it's something different. It's, you essentially have like three leading men who aren't necessarily competing with each other as characters in the film for Durbin's attention, but who are kind of competing with your mindset as to, how is this going to play out in terms of their relationship with her. I mean, Ralph Bellamy and Dan Duryea both find her character attractive, and make no bones about hiding that. And then you have this David Bruce character, the mystery writer, who at first he wants nothing to do with her because she's trying to drag him into solving this mystery, and it's just kind of disrupting his life with his fiance. And then as he starts to interact with her more, he finds himself drawn both into her play and to her. But Bruce had kind of an interesting career, and this is, I don't know, you could probably argue that this is kind of like his biggest film role. Like, this is the closest he ever came, I think, to being like a star, because he started out, a lot of his early work was at Warner Brothers. He showed up in movies like The Seahawk and Santa Fe Trail. Has a really good role in a horror comedy, not a mystery comedy, a horror comedy from the early 40s called The Smiling Ghost. But then he was released from his contract at Warner's to join the Air Force when World War II started. But because he had this chronic ear infection, he ended up being discharged from the service. Showed up in one of John Wayne's World War II movies, Flying Tigers, and then Universal gave him a contract. And the reason he kind of got cast in Lady on a Train is, he was basically off the strength of his performance in Christmas Holiday, which we've mentioned several times now in this episode. He was in that film as well. In fact, he had been in two of Deanna's previous films, Christmas Holiday and Can't Help Singing. And so he was cast in this part and does well at it. He's likable, he's believable in the more action-oriented scenes, yet he has good comic timing. So he definitely is an actor who you kind of wish you saw more of him in this kind of role and with this kind of chunk of a screenplay to work with. But basically, such was not to be the case. Eventually Universal released him with his contract. He worked in some low-budget films, did some work in some TV up until like the mid-50s. He did make an eventual comeback to filming in the early 70s with the film Moving Violation with Stephen McHattie and Kay Lenz, and unfortunately died after completing his first scene in the film, playing a reporter. And that was one of Corman's productions. We have to mention Roger Corman every chance we can get. But his daughter has gone on to some fame. His daughter is Amanda McBroom. And she had an acting career of her own. A lot of TV guest shots. I know her, and many might know her. I don't know if it's her most famous role from the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Measure of a Man, which is kind of considered where that show started to actually become good after struggling in like its first 1.5 seasons. She plays the JAG officer in that, who has to oversee the legal proceedings of that episode involving Data. but she's better known for her work as a songwriter, and she actually wrote the song "The Rose," which Bette Midler made famous. And she also continued to write songs. She wrote songs for like a whole mess of Universal animated films and such. But yeah, that was interesting. I had no idea that that was his daughter. And she also wrote a film. I mean, not a film. She wrote a song called "Errol Flynn," which is her kind of like talking about her dad in his life in that song. Now, going back to talking about the film, we talked about it as a noir, and like I said, it's also a murder mystery, and it does, it does keep you totally engrossed in that aspect of its narrative throughout the whole film. And yeah, I mean, you kind of have an idea who the villain is. That it's one of basically two people in the movie, but it does do a good job at kind of like having this labyrinthine plot that it unwinds, and it doesn't feel the need to kind of put all the cards on the table right away as to like this is why the murder happened and this is who did it and this is why this is who all the villains are and what their motivations are. It's more about just bringing Deanna into the situation, and then we start to see people who we suspect are bad guys react to her and doing things to keep her at bay and keep her from finding out too much. And like I said, the film don't feel the need to necessarily explain everything to us any more than Deanna Durbin's character is having things explained to her. So it kind of unravels, like I said, in this maze-like way, which is definitely an interesting approach to it. As a comedy, because it also says has a screwball comedy element, it definitely is succeeds on that level too. Screwball comedies, to me, that's a genre that I love the idea of it, but sometimes some of the films fall flat. I feel like, but then when you have a home run, a movie like My Man Godfrey, the 1930s film with Carole Lombard, who's kind of like to me like the queen of that genre, because also Nothing Sacred, the film she did, I think that was like the next year, 1937. Those are just probably two of my two favorites in that genre of screwball comedy. Um, when it does well, when it's hitting all cylinders, it's just incredible because there's this absurdist quality to it, which I really love. And Lady on a Train definitely it definitely works in that way. Durbin's character is presented to us as someone who has kind of a bit of an imagination already, which can kind of make it tough for people to take her seriously when she's trying to, tell them that someone's been killed. But you mix that in with this constantly changing mystery that's playing out before her. This idea, these plot ideas of her having to take on another identity briefly, like we talked about in the midsection of the film. All these different characters coming into play with her who, like I said, they might be villainous or not, especially the ones connected with the family. I mean, there's just and the constant, like I said, the constant moving from location to location with the film throughout the whole movie. There's just all this energy to it, basically, and all this potential for, in a good way, confusion, not confusion for the audience, but confusion for the characters. And in a very kinetic way, and that's like a great recipe for screwball comedy. That's what you think about something like My Man Godfrey. That's what that film works off a lot. Is like this manic pace to it, but with this like I said, with a sense of like absurdism to it. It's not just moving fast, but with no content of any interest. It's not just a fast-paced film with nothing to hold you in terms of its humorous elements. I mean, there's just also such a great amiable nature to the movie. Like everybody just feels like you just feel like everybody's having a good time. It's just a fun film, and that really, I think, part of that kind of come from just having so many great character performers in this film. I mean, it's just like when you stock a film with all these people, and the interesting thing too is it's even though they're great character actors, they're not necessarily all great comedic character actors. Edward Everett Horton, William Frawley, yeah, they were known for their comedy, even though they worked in other genres. But like I said, Dan Duryea and Ralph Bellamy, even though they had done comedies before this, I mean, that's what Bellamy was nominated for, The Awful Truth. But they also worked in other genres as well. They worked in dramas and noirs and westerns. They're just incredibly reliable cast. Like it's just like they don't have to, they don't phone their performances in at all. But at the same time, it's like that if you're walking onto the set, that they're going to hit their marks, know their lines, and just like without a sweat, breaking a sweat, just deliver these incredibly accomplished performances. It's like the perfect kind of cast you want for a film like this. And I'm sure it was a great relief too to a first-time director. Charles David being a first-time director to to have this cast to work with, and to have like such a professional cinematographer to work with. Um, I mean, it's not the kind of film where there's like, it's not a joke based film in the sense that like you're like, oh, there's this one part you got to watch where they say, it's not that kind of humor. It's more about the humor and the movement as just all this craziness is unfolding throughout the film. That really is where it succeeds at. Now, as we mentioned, because Durbin's in the film, she's got to sing some songs, and sometimes with a film like this too, you can, going into it, you're like, okay, it's gonna be mostly comedy and murder, mystery, but Durbin's in it, so there's gonna be some songs. We're just gonna have to sit through those songs. Which Durbin was incredibly gifted, talented singer, but a lot of the songs she was singing in her movies haven't necessarily gone on to become like these classics. And so sometimes when you go into a movie like this, you wonder, is this going to be the kind of the thing where there's like a 2 minute song every like 15 minutes that we're just going to kind of have to work our way through? And no, it's not like that at all. Actually, she only sings 3 songs in the movie, like I mentioned. One is Silent Night, which it's a Christmas movie. That's great. I want to have a Christmas song. And if anybody out there is wondering, like, okay, it doesn't sound like any of this plot has to do with Christmas. I assure you, this is very much a Christmas movie. It's not just a movie set at Christmas time. Basically, 99% of the narrative takes place, basically the entire film, except for like the end scene, takes place over Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And she sings Silent Night, and it's wintry outside. There's constant, Christmas trees. She goes to the police station to report the murder, and William Frawley's trying to decorate a miniature Christmas tree at the at his desk. When the killers tried to hide the death of this man who's murdered, they try to make it seem like he died from a fall while decorating his Christmas tree. Christmas is not just given lip service in this movie. It runs all throughout it. So I want to make that clear. This is, some people are like, oh, it's not really a Christmas movie. No, this totally is. But so Silent Night, you got to have that in there. And then she sings 2 songs later on while in the guise of this nightclub singer that she's impersonating. And one of them is Give Me a Little Kiss, which is very instrumental to the plot that she sings that. She sings it for a reason to, basically frustrate one of the characters. So it's played, even though it gives her a chance to sing, it's also played for a comedic value. And then she sings Night and Day, the famous Cole Porter song. And that's the moment, I would say, where it's kind of like that classic, it could be that classical music moment where, all right, she's in a nightclub, she's impersonating a nightclub singer, we got to let Deanna do her thing. But they shoot it so stylishly. They basically bring a film noir quality to this song she sings, and the way they film it, that it's so visually interesting, and it's a good song. There's a reason that song's a classic. So it's, again, just another level in which this film succeeds. It's mixing all these genres together. It's providing Deanna with the material which she's known for too, even though she's trying something different. She's trying to play a more adult role in a film based less in her music. It's also still kind of giving some stuff to her fans, but doing it in a way that really appeases someone like me who really kind of wants to see her kind of get away from some of that more music driven content into this kind of material. So it's great how it blends these genres together. It's great how it works on all these different levels. Unfortunately, neither this nor Christmas Holiday really had the impact that Durbin wanted on her career. Pretty much after these 2 films, neither they didn't really make the big splash and get the attention to her she was hoping for in a different context of the kind of role she could do. And so she went back to had to go back to kind of doing the same kinds of films, but tired of it, and then ended up leaving film behind. Her last film, Lady on a Train, came out in 1945. Her last film, For the Love of Mary, came out in 1948. And so she would have been, she was born in 1921, so she would have been like, just in her late 20s. And she was done for good. Her marriage to Felix Jackson, who produced a couple of these movies that she was in, ended, and she ended up actually marrying Charles David, director of Lady on a Train. And I did mention that he had directed one other film, and that was another Universal movie that came out that year, 1945. That was a film called River Gang, a B film. But he and Durbin, they ended up getting married in 1950, and they moved to France, and that's where they just stayed, the rest of their lives. I mean, now he was like 15 years her senior, but they were married right up until his death in 1999, so almost 50 years. And she had a child from her previous marriage, and then they had a kid, and so they both grew up with them over in France. And there were many attempts to lure her back into acting that were entirely unsuccessful. She seemed very happy with the change in her life. Joseph Pasternak, who was a longtime producer on a lot of her movies, wasn't really happy about the whole idea of her retiring. I mean, by this time, I don't think he was making movies with her anymore, but he tried to change her mind about this. And she said to him, and this is a quote from her, "I can't run around being a little Miss Fix-It who bursts into song, the highest paid star with the poorest material." So you do kind of wonder if she had gotten a better response to these different kind of films she did, would that have changed the trajectory of her career and her life? I don't know, but she did seem happy with, her retirement, her early retirement, and was very much about her privacy too. I don't know, she's just I find her story interesting. And even though there's that part of me that just wants to see her succeed on these other types of films, it's also cool that she just eventually did her own thing and, called it quits when she felt, rather than just keep doing material just for the sake of doing it. She just said, "I'd rather not do anything." So, there's definitely some props to that kind of philosophy. So yeah, Lady on a Train. It was a great way to kick things off. And definitely looking forward to getting back to you with some more Christmas viewing experiences. But check the film out. Like I said, there's a Universal DVD release of it. It was in this Deanna Durbin set they did, but it's also they did a standalone release of it, or you can pick up the Blu-ray as part of one of those film noir collections that Kino Lorber puts out. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And it might be streaming someplace too. Not so sure about that. But yeah, that's going to be it for this episode this week. A little shorter. Got to jump on a couple of these files for the Blu-ray that we're going to be hopefully getting to you soon, first quarter next year. But thank you for staying tuned to this first entry into Christmas-a-thon of December viewing in November. But yeah, continue to spread the news about the podcast. Please continue to give us some loving reviews on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And we will be back with you next week for another episode of Carpet City Cinema. Have a great week.